Hey, welcome to a new video. The first scene shows the Atlas Centaur, a big rocket with 4 parts that is sent out to explore far into space. This rocket is built to gather power from the sun and use the gravitational force of planets close by to travel across our solar system. Inside, it carries details about humans and a map of Earth. Its main goal is to discover intelligent creatures like those on our planet. Wow, let's not give ourselves too much credit, someone jokes. Next, the scene switches to a school teacher. It's Neil Clark, who is introduced as one of the greatest British writers ever. He is being interviewed by a lovely lady, Catherine, about his very popular book. But while Neil is talking, his dog Dennis starts barking loudly from among the audience. Soon, more dogs rush into the place, creating complete mayhem. Suddenly, Neil wakes up in his flat, realizing it was all a dream. Meanwhile, his dog continues barking until his neighbor Fiona comes knocking to complain like she often does. This time, she warns him to manage his dog better, or she will have to call the authorities. Are you new to this channel? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And before we continue, also like the video. Later, Neil takes his dog for a walk and bumps into another neighbor, Catherine West. He mentions to her that he just had a dream where she was awarding him for his new book. Maybe don't tell her that, he thinks to himself. She wonders if he has actually finished the book in real life, and he tells her he's nearly there. Neil has had a crush on her for a long time, but feels too shy to say it out loud. Meanwhile, far in space, the Atlas Centaur probe gets pulled into a tube connected to a huge, jellyfish-shaped alien spaceship. This spaceship belongs to the Extraterrestrial Galactic Council, who examine the probe and discover the drawings and a peaceful message it carries. After reviewing this, they start to discuss Earth, debating whether to destroy it or consider inviting humanity to join their council. One member views humans as savage, and believes destroying Earth would be better for the moral health of the intergalactic community. However, another more compassionate member argues that humans deserve a chance to show their worth. If they pass the test, they could be welcomed into the society of superior species. Back on Earth, Catherine is in her office, frustrated after a heated phone call with Grant, a man who can't seem to leave her alone. Just then, her boss walks in and instructs her to redo the questions for her upcoming TV interview with a best-selling author. She's told to dig into the author's controversial past to tarnish his image. Catherine tries to argue, pointing out the author's huge popularity, but her boss ignores her concerns. Soon after, the show's producer James approaches her saying that the audience loves scandal and character attacks more than straightforward interviews. Up in space, the Galactic Council decides to put humanity to a test. They plan to give one random human unlimited power to do anything they wish. If this person uses these powers for good, humanity will be welcomed into the council. If not, Earth will be destroyed. We are doomed, the council members say to themselves as they randomly pick Neil to be Earth's representative, giving him 10 days to prove that Earth deserves to be saved. After that, Neil, who just took a tumble off his bike because of a van, unwittingly uses his new extraordinary powers. He curses the van driver, and suddenly the van starts to swerve wildly. Meanwhile, Catherine is at a cafe with her best friend Rosie, discussing her issues with Grant. Rosie suggests she consider Neil, whom she finds quite likable. At the same time, Neil gets to school late because of his bike accident. He attempts to sneak past the principal's office, but gets caught. The principal, fed up with Neil's constant lateness, scolds him and wishes he could find a replacement. Neil then heads to his classroom but pauses at the door, reluctant to face his unruly students. Later, he has lunch with his colleague Ray, who is distressed because he can't seem to win over his crush, Dorothy. Ray asks Neil what he would do with unlimited power, leading Neil to joke about making his dog Dennis spit out the notes he had eaten. Unknowingly, Dennis does vomit the notes, which are mysteriously restored. Neil also quips that if he could really change his life, he'd have alien spaceships wipe out the classroom of students he dislikes. Suddenly, a loud explosion interrupts them. They rush to see what happened and find that the classroom has indeed been destroyed. Shaken by the event, Neil goes home and starts chatting with his dog Dennis. He insists that the classroom's destruction was just a coincidence, as he would never harm anyone intentionally. Trying to demonstrate that he really doesn't have any special powers, he jokingly tells Dennis's mess to clean itself up. To his astonishment, the poop obediently moves toward the bathroom and jumps into the toilet. I need a moment, Neil thinks, wondering if he's imagining things. He heads to the kitchen for a drink and accidentally knocks over a bottle of whiskey. To test his powers once more, he wishes for the whiskey to return to its bottle. At first, nothing happens, but when he waves his hand a second time, the whiskey miraculously flows back into the bottle, leaving Neil completely stunned. Now that Neil realizes he can do anything by simply waving his hand, he wishes for his old whiskey to be replaced with a new one. Surprisingly, the bottle jumps out and smashes into a nearby liquor store, setting off the alarm. He runs away as the police begin to chase him. Just as he's about to be caught, Neil wishes to be back home eating with his dog. In an instant, his wish comes true. and he disappears from the scene. So far, Neil has accidentally caused a classroom to be destroyed, dealt with unexpected canine cleanups, and inadvertently robbed a liquor store. I wonder what the aliens think. Once home, Neil realizes that he was actually responsible for the earlier explosion. Wanting to correct his mistake, he wishes for everyone who has ever died to come back to life. Consequently, all the deceased people start rising from the cemetery and moving toward his house. Panicked, Neil quickly specifies that only those who perished in the recent explosion should be revived. Thinking fast, he then wishes for the explosion to have never occurred. Everything reverses, and he finds himself back in the school cafeteria. After that, Neil heads to his class and finds the students just as annoying as before. He then wishes for all his students to become kind and hardworking. Instantly, his wish is granted, and the classroom turns quiet, a stark change from earlier. Neil just restructured the brain chemistry of a bunch of children. Way to go, Neil! Later, Neil spots the principal from afar and casually waves his hand to make him nicer towards him. As he walks past, he receives compliments from the principal. In the staff room, Neil sees Ray trying to talk to Dorothy but getting turned down repeatedly. Feeling sympathetic, he wishes for Dorothy to adore Ray, and within moments, it happens. That's definitely a criminal offense. On his way home, Neil jokingly wishes to be the president of the US, which immediately brings several armed guards to his side, escorting him to a car. However, they are soon ambushed by attackers, prompting Neil to wish himself back home. Later, he stands in front of the bathroom mirror and makes odd wishes, like having the body of Albert Einstein. Weird choice, that dude was shaped like an egg, he muses. Then he switches it up and wishes for the body of a famous athlete, and so on. Before going to bed, Neil curiously wishes to see inside Catherine's room downstairs. As he does, he sees her in her undergarments, ironing her clothes. He accidentally makes a noise, catching her attention. Caught off guard, he quickly reverses his action and also makes her forget the incident. How have the aliens not blown up the planet yet? He wonders aloud. The next day, Neil shares the secret of his incredible powers with Ray, who at first doesn't believe him. To prove it, Neil makes a skeleton talk and jump around outside. He then fills the entire room with flowers using his powers. These feats finally convince Ray, leaving him utterly astonished. Meanwhile, Grant finds Catherine on the street and tries to persuade her to go on a date with him. She declines and firmly tells him to leave her alone. As he leaves, he gives her the keys to his apartment, suggesting she can use them if she changes her mind. That evening, Catherine is at home talking to her best friend about the men in her life. She mentions that she's starting to like Neil. Hearing this, Rosie encourages her to make a move and talk to him. Meanwhile, out in space, an alien scientist notices that the galactic power is malfunctioning. To resolve the issue, they need to temporarily revoke the power they granted to Neil. At the same time, on Earth, Neil, realizing he's lost his powers, makes a wish for Catherine to fall in love with him. Just then, he hears a knock on the door, and it's Catherine. She unexpectedly kisses him, and they spend the night together, unaware that Grant, the stalker, is watching them. The next morning, the alien scientist manages to fix the power glitch and restores the powers to Neil. Upon waking up, Neil changes the rainy weather outside to sunny, and uses his powers to have his clothes dress him. While eating breakfast, he gives his dog Dennis the ability to talk. Dennis starts chatting about his favorite biscuits and expresses his affection for Neil. "I'd hump you if you let me," jokes Neil. Soon after, Catherine visits Neil to apologize for her unexpected actions the previous night. Just then, she hears Dennis talking from the bathroom, and Neil, trying to cover up, claims he's pretending to be a plumber. But when Dennis blurts out, "I love you," Catherine mistakenly thinks Neil is gay and storms off angrily. Trying to clear up the misunderstanding, Neil wishes to be on the same bus as Catherine. Instead, he ends up on the roof of the bus and quickly adjusts his wish. Meanwhile, Ray sees Dorothy adoring him in her lab, surrounded by other admirers. Realizing Neil must be behind this, Ray goes looking for him. He finds Neil just as he's getting off the bus and urges him to fix things. In a rush, Neil temporarily turns Ray into a sausage so he can continue chasing after Catherine. He attempts to explain everything to her, but she refuses to listen and walks away. Neil then turns Ray back into his human form. Later that evening, Catherine returns to her apartment only to find Grant waiting for her. Startled, she screams and quickly locks the door from the outside. Hearing her scream, Neil rushes over and suggests she come to his place to stay safe. Over dinner at his place, Neil decides it's time to reveal his superpowers to her, saying, "This is why you love me, isn't that great?" However, before he can demonstrate his powers, Grant breaks into the apartment and starts arguing with Neil. Catherine tries to intervene, but frustrated by their continued quarreling, she storms out in anger. After she leaves, Neil uses his powers to immobilize Grant, sticking him into the wall and eventually placing him in a flower pot. He then warns Grant that he could easily make him rich if he behaves, or just as easily make him vanish with a simple wave of his hand. This leaves Grant utterly shocked. Just then, Neil gets distracted by his dog, and Grant seizes the moment to knock Neil down from behind. Sometime later, Neil wakes up and realizes he's tied up in Grant's apartment. Grant has also taken Dennis the dog as a hostage and is demanding Neil grant a series of bizarre wishes. These include giving all Englishmen big ears and webbed feet, and changing the color of the British police uniforms to pink. Grant is a freaking idiot, Neil thinks. Meanwhile, Catherine suddenly senses that Neil could be in trouble, and heads back to his apartment. There, she discovers Ray hiding in a closet, trying to avoid Dorothy's relentless affection. The two then set out to find Neil at Grant's place. At the same time, Grant is indulging his delusions of grandeur, dressed up as a high-ranking officer adorned with medals. Shortly after, Catherine and Ray arrive at Grant's to rescue Neil. Neil quickly undoes all of Grant's ridiculous changes, including reverting him into a dog. He also puts an end to Dorothy's obsessive worship of Ray, restoring normalcy once again. But now, everyone is upset with Neil because of the chaos he's caused. Later, as he waits for Catherine to return home, he apologizes for everything. However, Catherine tells him she can't be with someone who might control her actions against her will. This deeply hurts Neil, leaving him devastated as he sadly heads back to his own place, realizing he had been selfish all along. Determined to make amends, Neil decides to use his powers to address global issues. He gives everyone as much food as they want and decrees that wars should cease entirely. He also grants everyone their dream home and attempts to reverse global warming. However, his solutions lead to unintended consequences. A spike in global obesity, every piece of land, including deserts, being developed for housing, and the planet slipping into a severe ice age. After dealing with the negative outcomes of his actions, Neil decides to undo all his wishes. Feeling down about his personal struggles and his failed attempts to better the world, Neil considers doing something drastic. He jumps off a bridge, but his dog, Dennis, jumps after him. This forces Neil to save his pet and in the process himself. After the incident, Dennis suggests that Neil should give the powers to him, pointing out his loyalty and unselfish nature. Neil thinks it over and agrees. Man, a lot of people are about to get humped. Meanwhile, the aliens conclude that Earth does not meet their standards. The Galactic Council operates on a moral code that values dominance and views compassion as a weakness. Neil's efforts to end wars and improve lives are seen as flaws. Convinced of humanity's weakness, the aliens decide to destroy Earth. In a surprising twist, Dennis, now endowed with all the power, wishes for the source of the power to be destroyed. This leads to the annihilation of the alien spaceship and its neighboring planets, magically sending Neil back to his apartment the following day. Back in his normal life and without any powers, Neil gathers the courage to invite Catherine out for dinner. To his great joy, she accepts his invitation. Meanwhile, it turns out that Dennis still has the powers, as he only wished for the source of the power to be destroyed, not the powers themselves. Is the destruction of the alien species truly a happy ending? I'm not sure. That was all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. See you in the next one.